All right, hello everybody. This is the NARC staff, and we just wanted to let you know that we're going to give people a few more minutes to join us and to log into the webinar. We should be starting about 3:03 p.m. Just a note, if your computer isn't already muted or your phone, please do that before we start. Thank you. Hello everyone, if you're just joining us, this is the NARC staff. We are going to give people a couple more minutes to log in and we'll start about 3:03. Thank you. Okay, well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us, and welcome to our Regional Food Planning Initiatives Help Shape Healthy Communities webinar. My name is Macy Morin, and I'm a program coordinator at the National Association of Regional Councils. Should you have any technical questions during the webinar, please email Cameron Herbolsheimer. His email is cameron@narc.org, and you can see it on the welcome slide here. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. There will be time for questions and discussion at the end of the presentations. If you have a question during the presentation, please type it into the questions box on your control panel on the right-hand side. And a recording of the webinar and a copy of the slides will also be made available after the webinar. So with that, let's get started. Since consumer preference for local food is on the rise in our communities, this provides several great opportunities for regions, especially for those that encompass rural areas. Our agenda for today includes an overview of the local food and regional food economies and how regional councils have a natural advantage for leading food planning initiatives. You will also hear some great examples of the work regional councils are currently doing in this space, including the challenges and opportunities they have encountered along the way. This conversation is especially timely with the upcoming reauthorization of the Federal Farm Bill. The Farm Bill, which expires on September 30th, authorizes programs that help make an important impact on local and regional food systems. This includes providing healthy food access to low-income families, supporting beginning farmers, ag producers, and micro-entrepreneurs in rural counties, and providing grants that some of our speakers today have even been able to utilize to help with their own food planning initiatives. So today, I'm pleased to be joined by a few of our friends, local food and rural businesses expert James Matson, managing member and principal from Matson Consulting, Associate Professor of Agribusiness and Rural Development, Dr. David Lemie from Clemson University, whose Extension Emerging and Small Farms programs is focusing on local, regional, and community food systems initiatives, Gregory Sprouse, the Director of Research, Planning, and Development, who is currently leading the way for Central Midlands Council of Governments Regional Food Planning Initiatives, and David Shabazian, a NARC webinar veteran and the Rural Urban Connections Strategy Manager at the Sacramento Area Council of Governments. To start us off, we will first hear from James Matson from Matson Consulting.
Yes, if I could get you to click to the first slide for me. Good afternoon, y'all. I guess I get the interview opportunity of leading off and starting to chit-chat a little bit about local foods and set the plate, I guess, for the other folks to help to deliver and sort of, talk about where they're heading on the process with it. My name's Jim Matson. I've spent about 30 years, I guess, bouncing around working on food systems and food systems work both domestically and internationally. If you want to go ahead and click to the next slide. With it, I have had my own consulting firm for about the past 15 years, located in Aiken, South Carolina, and we do work around the country. And our work is set up with food systems as a whole. We do everything from working with folks on, planning for individual projects through community and community things. In some ways, we've sort of backed into regional work by, if you go ahead and click to the next slide as well, regional work by sort of looking for where the problems are, and that a lot of these food initiatives, lend themselves quite directly for, regional projects. And if you're dealing across, jurisdictions and other things, if you're producing the food in a rural area, often your mouths that are going to be eating it may be in an urban part of the same area or even further. So they lend across with it. And one of the areas, go ahead to the next slide, has been particularly work within food hubs, which has kind of been established working there with it. Which food hub is sort of a facility for aggregation and distribution of local foods for those that haven't been involved with it. And not explaining what that is today, but just put a link there for folks that are interested. We've done a lot of publications out on it, some work with USDA, as well as even stuff through Treasury and other places on it. What I was going to do was going to present sort of 5 cases of different types of work around the country that we've kind of done out of my shop. Go ahead and click to the first case. And just laying the groundwork again for what some of these other projects have been doing. But first, I wanted to give just 2 reasons as to why local food and what makes sense to be involved in local food. And wanted to drop 2 statistics, fairly simple, that were out there. One, that in 2015, according to some USDA statistics, local food sales were about $8.7 billion, and it was a fairly quickly growing sector of the economy as well. And the other one was, and with this dollar sitting there on the slide, that in normal sales, the farm share is only about 15.5 cents of the total food dollar, and the rest of it goes to the marketing side. Well, if that's leaving your region, most of that money leaves your region. And with local food, then you're able to get a much larger multiplier and keep that money in your region and spread those development dollars much further if you can. So I was going to put a few examples if we can click, starting with the South Carolina example there. So I sort of deliberately picked examples that we had worked with, trying to look at places where the COGS have been involved in, and see how the cluster approach works as far as tying together what's doing. Because when you're looking at food economies, there's sort of been a definition out there. Can we click to the next slide, please? A definition out there as far as looking at what's happening and what could be, and there's sort of a vertical and horizontal link back to that. The horizontal side, we mentioned through food hubs, it's helping to coordinate the individual activities and food from particular producers or any particular business is helping. And then vertically helping it through sort of food innovation clusters, which is similar to other approaches that you've seen through, cluster approaches, but sort of seeing how the businesses are grouped together to help to provide, better development for a region or area through that cluster approach. So I was going to give some examples of how different clusters of that fit together and how they work together throughout the country. So bounce right in for that South Carolina one that I sort of leaped on ahead of time on the first one. Now the first one there on South Carolina, with the slide on that one that we can talk about, is a group there called Watson Family Farms within there. And Watson Farms is doing sort of a local and organic produce with it. They've converted from sort of a long time peach farm, and they had actually were under bankruptcy protection about 6 or 7 years ago, which they've come out of through doing local food sales. Hopefully the slides will catch up to us there. But what we're doing with that is this particular business has about $10 million a year of sales, and has employed more than 100 different workers on their farm directly. They also influence lots of other farmers back in there, and they fit very much into the development approach that the Midlands is looking at, as sort of ag being one of the sectors they're working on. And so they were able to take sort of this, this local food sales and help them to move from bankruptcy to viability. They also, with this process, they were able to get we were able to help them secure a USDA value-added producer grant for $250,000 to help to fund this conversion as a way to look over it. So in another region, if we can catch up with Alabama, we have one that looks out with a project that was funded through a rural cooperative development grant. And that came through the Federation of Southern Co-ops Development Center. And this project was particularly focused on minority producers looking to try to get income generation. A lot of these producers were actually making, less than $100,000, certainly from agricultural production. But the income that they were generating from this project was really important because it added directly for poverty alleviation and helped them for community planning, particularly in areas that there weren't, job alternatives and other things. So it was a project of taking that money, of tying it in. It also tied in with some work that the COG was doing from that region in helping to set up direct sales from rural stores and rural mom and pop stores. So this was another way of providing product that helped to feed into that pipeline and dealing with food deserts and some of those other issues of rural poverty and that isn't always quite as visible as some of the other types. So another thing that's been happening with a lot of these food hub developments, on the next slide please, has been a lot of these food hubs are beginning to come together around the country, and they are creating networks among themselves, helping to move products and other things with it. And this is a list that Jim Barham from Rural Development helped to share with me, but it's a sort of a quickly evolving list of projects around the country. But I wanted to focus on the ones that are happening out in California with the California Food Hub Network that kind of overlaps a little bit of the work from the Sacramento is coming in. If we click on the next one, I was going to mention some of the results from the local food hubs there in the Northern California Food Hub Network, which this came about through the University of California with their School of Agriculture there. But they helped to fund this out of a global food initiative, but they brought together 6 different food hubs in a network of sharing, etc. But between these hubs, they had both very rural areas. They went as far as from Lake Tahoe all the way back to Oakland with it. So they were doing both areas that have real rural poverty need, but also rural other areas. So tying that together and trying to tie sort of shared learning, trying to share sales across each other, working where they were doing product-wise and really helping to grow what was happening and tie this network together and crossing lots of boundaries while doing it as well. I want to give 2 other examples real fast on the next slide, with some from, one was from Key West, which was the Star of the Sea Food Bank, which helped to get a funding from with us with just under $500,000 with what was called the Local Food Promotion Program. With it, they were using the food bank and tying in with producers up near the Miami area, particularly small-scale producers, but providing food access for local foods. Believe it or not, in that region, there wasn't a lot of food production there on the on the archipelago and areas that are happening with it, but they also were working with their community kitchen to try to increase by having the food there to make the kitchen itself more viable, being able to service, several hundred folks that were doing meals, et cetera, out of that kitchen, and really try to fund that project. Now, I will say that project has been a little slower in implementation because when you get a Category 4 hurricane across your doorstep, it does slow down project development with it. But no, it's a project that's there and really strong of happening what's going to the future with there. And then in northern Colorado, with the food cluster there, they use some funding from the Local Food Promotion Program, as well as the New and Beginning Farmer Rancher Program that we helped them look at new and beginning food sales and help to look at regional planning. They have two of the fastest growing counties in the country there. So they were both focused on what was happening with direct to food sales, but they were also looking about using that to look at population growth areas, planning for regional development, also the resources for resource competition among areas, particularly water, and how that's happening for issues, but focusing in it with that sort of focus of food that we're developing with it. And then on the last slide, if we can, I want to, as I'm finishing up, provide a couple just folks that are working in this area and a few resources that may be able to help. USDA obviously is a huge source of funding within their own approach. They've been really strengthening their regional approach, and a lot of programs now give bonus points for projects across jurisdictions that lead themselves directly to COGS. They also have developed a toolkit for local food economies out of the agricultural marketing service with it, that provides a lot of areas of in-plan and some numbers and some tools that are really specific and honed in on that. I also want to specifically mention the Wallace Center. They've done some work in the past for the National Good Food Network, helping with looking at food hubs and working with that. They are recently developing a food system leadership network, looking at folks that are tying together these folks in the food value chain, helping to do it. And then they have some work with their community-based food systems where they have, which is again that focus more on the communities itself and how to do community development, and a link there. And then, and surprisingly it may seem, EPA has a really great document out there with local food, local places. It's a great toolkit that gives some great startup information and some ready to roll places for doing local foods. With that, I'm going to pass the torch over to the next person, and thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, James. Now we are going to turn it over to David Lemie from Clemson University.
Hello, everyone. Dave Lemie. I'm happy to join you today, and glad we're just getting started on this discussion, which I think is going to be hopefully the beginnings of a quite important discussion going forward with those of you who are interested in this topic. Go ahead and go to the next slide, and go ahead and feel free to just catch up with what I'm talking about, I guess, all the way through. And so I'm going to give you a little bit about my background, because I think it might help you understand kind of why I'm at this place on these topics right now. I was a farm kid, grew up in Indiana, grew up on a farm, family still farms there and that sort of thing, but I saw the lights of the big city and never returned to the farm. I was looking for, I guess, some other professional development opportunities in my life, and carried on with higher education all the way through a PhD. But when I was finishing up my master's degree, and when I did finish that up, I worked at Purdue then to help them establish a Center for Rural Development. And by kind of taking a look back at rural regions and thinking about them a little differently, and kind of working in that area for a while, began to see a lot of decay that was going on in many rural regions, and it was quite disheartening to the people who still lived there. And to me, and I know from talking to others who kind of had those roots, that there's got to be some better way for these rural regions to participate in a globalizing economy, in an advancing economy that many of the urban areas were able to participate in much more successfully. So I kind of made my career path in that direction. So I've worked under various different domains: community and economic development, regional development, rural development. It's all kind of taken on different forms in different places. But my very first job back there at Purdue, when we set up that Center for Rural Development, was to work with a program called Take Charge, which was all about helping to instigate a process in counties at that point in time to take a long-range view, to build some consensus around a long-range vision, to develop goals, and do some strategic action planning so that they could move together in a more unified way. And we looked at those kind of fundamental questions of planning of where are you now, where do you want to be, and how are you going to get there. And that really kind of set the foundation, I think, for my career, and decided to continue to pursue a PhD in regional economics at Clemson, and after that worked at Virginia Tech and then at an Institute for Rural Affairs in Illinois. And I've been back here at Clemson now for going on 13 years, still working kind of on this idea of rural development and regional development. Along the way, I think the regions that I felt like we need to work at kept expanding. Really kind of started at that community level and moved to the county, multi-county, depended upon the issue that we're dealing with, and really kind of what made logical sense from a geographical sense and from an economic sense, with economies of scale involved or that sort of thing. And so along the way, I've worked on a number of different kind of more topical areas within that framework. Worked on broadband deployment, and then once you've got that in place, what do you do with it? Worked with creative class strategies for rural areas and for communities that were in need of attracting people and businesses that were innovators to help kind of move their economies along. And about in 2010, I think it was, I applied for one of these USDA Beginning Farmer Rancher Development Program grants, and began to work pretty directly on this whole idea of creating the next generation of farmers, which many of you who may not be coming from that background may not completely appreciate, that the average age of farmers has been increasing for generations now in our country, and right now the average age out there across the country is approaching about 60. When you compare that to other industries, average age more down in the 30s and 40s, it's quite a dramatic difference. And there's a number of reasons for that that we won't go into right now. But the farmers in these rural areas have been kind of the mainstay. And in fact, we organize a lot of our federal rural policies around the farmer and the agriculture sector. But they can't operate in isolation. In these regional economies, they're there doing what they know how to do and can do. There's a whole support network, and there's a lot of other pieces needed to really drive those rural regional economies. And one of the areas that's kind of come to the fore in the last 15, 20 years, both in our country and abroad, is this whole idea of regional food systems, where the producers who are there have the other support infrastructure pieces in place to deliver a more localized food supply to residents within some kind of a, say, more localized regional boundary than would otherwise occur if we just kind of depended upon a more global food supply chain to bring us what we put on our table on a regular basis. So why don't you go ahead and advance the slide there. So a few things that I've come across and I've been involved in here in South Carolina since I've been here working on this topic that have been important to me, and I'd encourage you to look for similar sorts of things within your regions. So for a few years I was involved with the South Carolina Food Policy Council and actually chaired that group, and that was a really good organization to kind of bring awareness to some of the issues that related to things like food access and what kinds of infrastructure pieces do we need to put in place to help support the ag and food economy across the state, say at a more micro level and the state level. How do we need to collaborate across across boundaries of agencies and organizations, so that we can be more effective at carrying out our individual courses of action. And so that's something I would encourage you to look for no matter where you are for these sorts of organizations. And that's a good one at the statewide level that may exist where you are. An outcropping of that, we created a South Carolina Food Access Task Force that was to provide a little more focused lens on food access issues. That came out of the Food Policy Council, one of the events we planned there. It's a follow-up. And they made headway, created some good reports, and got in front of the legislature to draw awareness and attention to those issues. And then at a multi-county level, I believe we have 8 counties in it. There was this interest about 6-7 years ago now of potentially developing something like a food hub in the region. And so some of the agency collaborators in the region came together and put together an organizational structure that really is kind of a loose network with some rules about how we come together and relate to each other. I'd encourage you to go to that website and kind of see what we've done organizationally, but it's been very instrumental in keeping an ongoing conversation going on around these issues, to organize public events, to help support educational events, and then eventually to help with planning and other things at the regional level that can lead to really informed action. And I didn't list them out here, but there is another organization that kind of came out of that group, that's the Midlands Food Alliance, and that's a much more kind of action-oriented group of individual businesses and farmers, and those who can more comfortably than the agencies can advocate for particular outcomes. So that's out there. Another project that I was working with that many of your states have is this Market Maker project, and we have a website here that's an online database and mapping tool, and got a number of suite of tools in there that can be helpful for food system development that about 22 states, I think, or so are working in right now with that project. So that's something for you to go take a look at. And really kind of the jumping off point, I think, for a good part of the conversation remaining while you've got me here is what happened with the Stronger Economies Together program. This is a program that is funded by USDA Rural Development. It's an intentionally multi-county regional long-range visioning and planning program that states can apply for, and once they apply for it, regions within that state can apply for those. There's a link to more information out there on that program. But in our state, a subcommittee out of that Midlands Local Food Collaborative worked with others in the region to pursue that program. And we were, and they won the contest, and we actually implemented the program in the state over a number of months, just taking a long-term look, not just at say ag and food systems within the region, but a much broader kind of focus on economic clusters and what seemed to be the most rational strategies for developing a regional approach for economic development. And behind the scenes, while this was going on, the Economic Development Administration, which many of you are very familiar with, they developed an MOU with USDA Rural Development around this program, such that the outcomes, the planning products that come out of this, the plans themselves, are recognized as community economic development strategies. So that those programs are now quite integrated. So that's that's a part of the process that set the stage here in the region that I think Gregory Sprouse in a bit will talk a little bit more about and where that's led to. Another asset out there in our southern region, it's the only one in the country I know about like this. Land-grant universities have been very involved in a lot of agriculture-related and food system-related projects, research, extension, and teaching activities for quite a while. One of the problems is they seem to be kind of scattered across institutions, across states. Some components are in research, some are in extension and outreach. So we created a mechanism, an organization basically in the southern states that tries to bring all of those efforts together so that we can have a little bit more keen focus on food systems development from both an extension and research perspective in our region here. folks from other states could join this regional project, but it's really the focus is on the southeastern U.S., about 13 states and the territories out of the Caribbean. So why don't we do the next slide? So in working with that Stronger Economies Together program in the Midlands region, the central part of the state of South Carolina, we were lucky at the Midlands Local Food Collaborative. One of its, say, more recent members at the time was our Central Midlands Council of Governments. And I had some familiarity working with them from other states I'd been in, and kind of had this sense that there's probably a pretty good fit for them to be involved in these issues. I knew that it was not a real traditional area for them to be working in, perhaps, but I thought that down the road there might be some real synergies that could play out. And lo and behold, I think we've kind of come into its fore on that approach, and it's beginning to really make some good sense. And as we were doing that, we began to do some work with another regional council over in Montgomery, Alabama, and they were kind of on a similar path and trying to figure out what would be their role in this regional food systems development work as a council of government or as a regional council. And so I tried to lay out just some various roles here that I think a regional council could play, and hopefully we can have some good discussion around this going forward. But I think at the very least, regional councils are well positioned just to increase the awareness of these issues that are out there around food systems development work, all the way from food access to infrastructure to logistics and transportation planning and those things that play into this regional food system development. They could, if there was a need to, and we had enough attention and interest from local governments and other stakeholders, they could play a convening role. And I think we've seen that happen in our region here, and I've heard from other regions that is happening as well. To bring them together, help them think through maybe long-range plans, goals, strategies, and to, one of the issues that I see surrounding local food system development, and perhaps this kind of plays into this, is like Jim Madsen was presenting, a lot of individual projects out there that oftentimes are grant funded that aren't necessarily well connected to each other. Sometimes they have a certain shelf life of 3-4 years, and they also have maybe a particular geography, and they need to have some kind of some continuity that some kind of an institutional anchor can help play to pull those together over time and over space, so that they can really draw out the synergies and see the results that everyone hopes for. I think some can provide technical assistance in the support of these things, feasibility studies, mapping projects, a number of things that could be very beneficial that some regional councils have capacity to deliver on. I think when it comes to organizations that might be developed, like in our case in the Midlands, food policy councils and those sorts of things, they could become involved and become an officer, play a leadership role in those organizations. They could eventually, if they have a comfort zone around this, advocate for specific outcomes, though I guess most would probably not want to do that themselves. However, they might be able to be supportive of other, say, sister organizations that might be able to have, say, a more keen focus on a specific outcome that might be more value-laden and kind of outside the comfort zone of the normal regional council scope of operations. So those are just some ideas that I have about roles that you might play. I think in the rest of this webinar, you're going to hear a couple examples of some that are playing some of those roles. There may be other roles, and I'm sure that there are others out there across the country, maybe some of you on this webinar, that see yourself already working in this space, and we hope to learn more from you going forward.
All right, thank you, David. Next, we are jumping over to Gregory Sprouse from Central Midlands Council of Governments.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. If you could go to the first slide there, I'll provide you all who are not familiar with our state a little bit of geographic context about the area that I'm going to be talking about and that both Dave and Jim have already mentioned. So we are a small state over here in South Carolina, and we've got a beautiful coastline and beautiful mountains, which probably most of the folks that come visit us are familiar with, but there's also a vast area in between that we call the Midlands because it's geographically situated in the middle of the state. And the focus of this region is the city of Columbia, which I'm not allowed to say is the largest city in the state anymore at 134,000 people, because as of last year, Charleston surpassed us by about 34 people. But we also sit within a metropolitan statistical area of a little over 800,000 people. And even though we in the Midlands, the 4-county COG area around Columbia, have the city of Columbia that we work with, we also serve a vast rural area that's rich in natural, cultural, and agricultural resources. And within that urban-rural geography, we have seen in recent years a growing demand for local food, but we've also seen limitations in supply to meet that demand. And we also have seen persistent and in many ways growing disparities in access to healthy food. And so I guess what I'm going to focus on today, following up from a lot of what Dave was talking about, is this how we've collaborated on some of these projects and got into this food system work, and then probably just touch on, if there's time, a couple of key areas that are challenges that we've faced. But just to quickly say that when I first started getting into the food system work, it became really apparent how it was such an integral part of the larger community planning process, with a lot of overlap and integration with the many other areas of planning that we were already involved with. And for those of you that are planners out there but maybe new to the food system work, I encourage you to look at the APA policy guide on community and regional food system planning, which the very first of the 7 goals in that policy state that food system planning should support comprehensive planning processes that integrate food systems into traditional areas of practice. So that is really where we have focused a lot of our efforts. And so one of the first things that I realized in this approach is that regional councils really are a natural fit for this type of work. It's consistent with our mission of trying to address issues that go beyond individual political jurisdictions. And over the past 15 years that I've been working for a regional council, I've come to the conclusion that really the single greatest asset of a regional planning agency is our boardroom, where we bring together elected officials and appointed officials from around the region to talk about and work through these types of issues. And because of this, we have an incredibly deep, sometimes indirect reach into the community, and we have strong relationships with local governments at all levels, from elected officials to town staff. We've got strong relationships with other various governmental, non-governmental, and private sector partners. And because of our regional focus, we have this built-in organizational capacity to help bridge this urban and rural divide. And then finally, because of all these other things, we have a vast untapped potential for the horizontal and vertical integration of all of our existing planning programs. So that graphic on the right there shows how food system planning really fits horizontally into everything we do, from economic development to community development to planning at the local level to transportation, workforce, and aging services. But because of our nature as a regional agency, we also can help vertically integrate among all areas of government, from the federal to the state down to the local level. And so really what we're trying to do is identify the common ground between these different planning areas that we're all involved with and figure out how we can leverage that integration. The challenge that we all face as regional councils, is that we, by nature, have a very high level of focus. We look at everything from the 15,000 foot level. We're long range in nature, with typical planning horizons of 10 to 30 years, and we're geographically diverse. And we have, for the most cases, I know a lot of regional entities across the country have some policy-making, decision-making authority, but for the most part, we're volunteer organizations that really don't have any kind of decision-making powers. and overall lack of dedicated funding streams for regional organizations to really engage in food system planning work because it's not one of our traditional areas of practice. Therefore, it's been difficult to participate in work that's done at the local level. It's difficult to effectively engage other organizations working in these areas, and most importantly, it's been difficult to effectively engage citizens at the grassroots level. So the question for us became, how do we take advantage of some of these opportunities and try to address some of these challenges? And we've realized that the best way for us to contribute to this food conversation is to figure out this whole horizontal and vertical integration question of how does food system planning relate to our existing COG programs, and how can we as COGs help to facilitate stakeholder coordination, collaboration, and leverage each other's existing strengths and resources. And so I won't go into a whole lot of detail to ensure that we've got time for a full conversation here, but the project that really got us involved was the joint land use study, where we were working with our military installations to promote compatible land uses around 3 military installations to help preserve open space and mitigate residential encroachment. And as you all know, the regulatory approach isn't always the most effective approach, so we began thinking about how we could better incentivize working land uses that meet those compatible military use guidelines, but at the same time promote local community and economic development goals. And so this is where we started really thinking about food system work and started getting involved with a lot of the groups that Dave was mentioning here in our area. You can go to the next slide, please. So we began working with the Midlands Local Food Collaborative and MFA, and one of the first projects that I got involved in working with them was to try to figure out how we could really leverage our collective impact of all these different organizations. And so we went on and pursued what I call an organizational asset map, where we tried to figure out who all of our partners are, what do they do, what sector do they work in, and through that help us identify what our common goals and mutually reinforcing activities are, as well as identifying the gaps, the needs, and the empty seats, basically who's not at the table with us that we need to engage. And this would help strengthen the network through ongoing communication and collaboration, and identify some projects for us to collaboratively pursue and integrate them then into our existing planning framework. So if you go to the next slide, what you'll see is a graphic that illustrates how we took the Stronger Economies Together program that Dave was mentioning and directly integrated it into a couple of our other planning projects. So we took that planning process, which brought together a whole bunch of different stakeholders involved with food systems, as well as 2 other neighboring councils of governments, to develop our comprehensive economic development strategy update that directly looked at local food systems, linking local food systems to military installations, as well as linking local food systems to our recreation, arts, tourism, and workforce development programs. And those were all strategies or focus areas that directly came out of that Stronger Economies Together program. And as you can see at the bottom of the graphic, that also is directly linked in with the goals of our joint land use programming with the military installations. And all of this work together is leading us into the realm of trying to develop a comprehensive regional baseline food system assessment that can kind of tie all of this stuff together. So the last thing I'll mention is, if you go to the next slide, just a couple of other challenges that we faced as we've gotten into this work, is that we're continuing to figure out how to better integrate food system planning into our local level work. And the South Carolina Health and Planning ToolKit, which is a part of the South Carolina Health and Planning Advisory Committee, has produced a really great document that provides a lot of model comprehensive plan guidance. And we've been working with the South Carolina Food Access Task Force to really engage in the transportation and food access issue, which is a huge priority area in our state, where we have a huge need, especially in the rural areas, where we have a lot of households that do not have access to vehicles, and therefore have problems in job security and food security. And don't have any answers for that one yet, but we are a natural fit to engage in that with our existing transportation planning programs that we do here. And then finally, we've also mobilized our separate 501c3 community development corporation, which is a part of the COG here, to try to work with some of the nonprofit entities and other community-based groups to provide a structure to help pursue grant opportunities and other types of activities where we can actually get some projects implemented on the ground. So with that, I will pass on to the next speaker.
All right, thank you, Gregory. And to round out the conversation, we will go to David Shabazian from the Sacramento Area Council of Governments.
Oh, I guess I should take the mute off here. Well, thanks for having me, and appreciate the interest in what we're doing out here in the Sacramento region. So I manage a program called the Rural Urban Connection Strategy, or RUCS. And that tagline there is, I think, really important. So I'm going to dwell on this for just a minute here. So enhancing rural economic viability and environmental sustainability. So that's, in essence, what we're up to here. The story, how we got here is rather interesting, but you know, suffice to say that we have been, I think, really doing a disservice to the rural parts of our region when it comes to regional planning. And so when we decided to tackle this, we wanted to really look at this from an economic lens, because it's what's binding our region together, is driving the economy, job growth. And then for us here at SACOG, that is the underpinning of our transportation plan. So it was really important for us to understand the economic drivers in the rural parts of our region, how they link to the urban parts of our region. And then we're operating on the premise that if we can figure out how to improve the revenues from rural land, that we then get the environmental services from that landscape. So in this region, flood control is a big deal. We need to keep that land open to take water off the rivers and dump it into ag land. Groundwater recharge is another function that is really important here. California is drying up, and so we need to find new places to store that water. Habitat, carbon sequestration, all of these are services that we get out of open land, not built land. And so those two pillars are really important going forward, is to understand, again, how can we make these rural economies work? How can we create more value in the landscape, and then get the ecosystem services out of that landscape that we get today, and maybe even figure out how we can pay for those. And there's obviously models out there where people are paying for ecosystem services. We would like to figure out how to maximize that as well. So what is regional planning? Well, in the past, and even today, it's about looking at the future and saying, okay, how do we prepare for that? Unfortunately, that's been mostly about urban areas and growth there. And so regional planning has really been about a collection of urban areas. And so in this region, we were missing about 85% of our land base by focusing just on the cities in our region and how they knit together as a region. I think it's really important to consider the public-private partnership in planning. So planning is basically having a vision for your future, putting that down in plans, strategies, ordinances, and then hoping that the private sector sees it the same way and decides to kind of walk with you hand in hand into this future. Often there's a lot of tension there, and so we see a lot of general plan amendments and zoning ordinance amendments, so that the private sector can implement what it sees as its vision for the future. So one way or another, this is a public-private partnership. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but we have to acknowledge that it takes both for us to get into that future that we have in mind. And then again, finally, that there really is a rural-urban connection here. We cannot just plan in a vacuum, and that was recognized at SACOG back in about 2004. The conversation started, and by 2008, we had then kicked off the RUCS program. But a lot of the rural parts of our region were saying, hey, we're not getting anything out of regional planning and your transportation plan. You know, you need to start doing something that also recognizes that we're out here too. And so the RUCS program was conceived, you know, kind of with that kind of a backdrop. Again, kind of going back to the policies and the planning. So this map is a composite of the general plans in our region. So again, high level of detail about what's happening in our urban areas. And then when you get to rural, it's just green. And so, you know, it puts on the table the question, well, what does green mean? And for some people that means agriculture, for other people that means open space, and for many people out there that just means future urban. And so what we really needed to do was figure out first and foremost, well, what in the heck is going on here? Again, the population breaks down opposite of how the landscape breaks down. So we have 85% of our population in urban areas, 15% rural, but the land base is flipped. And that's kind of true nationally, I believe. And so what we did is we said, no, I mean, that's just one look at our region. If we look at our region through a rural lens, this is what it looks like. And we have now, on a field by field basis, an inventory of all the crops being grown in our region. And when you put it all together, what you have in essence is a de facto general plan for agriculture. Again, that plan reflecting economic decisions about how to use the land going forward to make money. So just like on the urban side of the equation, if a developer says, hey, I'm going to put in, 1,000 acres of housing, because I think I can make money at doing that, a farmer might say, hey, I'm going to put in 1,000 acres of almonds or peaches because I think I can make money doing that. And so what you have is, again, economic drivers of how to use land. And so understanding those economics become really important. So that's the underpinning then of going into this project with that look. And of course, we had to then say, well, we have to kind of structure this project. How are we going to do that? Obviously, we need to look at the land use and conservation strategies. How are they helping or hurting rural economies? So it's not just rural land use, it's also urban land use, and how much are we forecasting we're going to convert to urban uses going forward. We need to look at the infrastructure that affects the industry, so processing facilities, roads, all that hard infrastructure, but also people. So I think it was David that mentioned the average age of the farmer is going up. That human infrastructure is becoming really important. We're losing those farmers, and even worse, we're losing farm labor. I mean, Mexican farmers can't even get enough labor to harvest their crops. So California and the rest of the country is having the same problem. Of course, we need to understand the markets that are out there and how they're changing so that we can get our region and our farmers and our processors positioned to go after those markets. Forest management, I could talk for hours about this. It's a huge problem in California. There's also a big opportunity, but the long story short for us is that a lot of the water that we use comes out of the Sierra Nevadas. The forest management problems are making that water supply more and more challenging. And so it became a topic in and of itself for this project. And then finally, the regulations that help or hurt these industries. That's kind of the common thread that runs through everything. So that's how we broke down the project into topic areas and what's been driving the different kinds of analyses that we do. Again, just understanding, okay, so we need to understand our opportunities and challenges. We're well positioned as an ag region. We are right in the middle of the Central Valley of California. So we have great natural assets. We see rising demand for food and that people want more processed food. So the value add part of the food system is really important. What are we looking at though in terms of challenges? We lack that food aggregation processing infrastructure that we used to have here, but it has moved to other parts of California or just completely out of the state. We are going to have water and labor supply problems going forward. It's just the writing's on the walls. We have to figure out how to operate in that environment. Regulations, again, are they helping or are they hurting? And then growth pressure. I mean, there's still a lot of people being born in California and moving to California, and we have to accommodate that. It's just a matter of how much land are we going to consume to do that. At the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is figure out how do we position our region to be competitive, to attract investment, so that we can move into those new markets and we can move into the new technologies that are driving the industry and creating efficiencies and jobs that are maybe more tech in nature rather than laborers in the field. So we, in good SACOG fashion, put together a toolkit built a lot of data, like that map that I showed you earlier. That's again, a parcel level map, which has a lot of economics behind it about growing all those crops. And then we want to say, okay, well, what happens in the future? So what happens as those cropping patterns change? Are farmers going to continue making money, or are they going to start losing money? And so we have a tool that runs scenarios, mainly to look at the economics. But we are also building upon that to start looking at ecosystem services. So we look at the national, international market opportunities and how they affect our crops here at home. We're looking at the local and regional market opportunities, and again, how they affect cropping patterns. And then we turn the crank on the model, and it starts to give us outputs like return on investment, and how much water do we need? How much trucking are we putting on the road? How many laborers do we need out in those fields for planting and harvesting? So it gives us some basic indicators and metrics of measuring these different possible futures in agriculture. Again, as I mentioned, we're starting to link that to ecosystem services. So how does it affect carbon sequestration, habitat, groundwater recharge? I don't have a picture on here for flood control, but also how is it affecting flood control? So this is our basic modeling suite. So now we've got good data, we've got a good modeling platform to now have a conversation with the region about what are we doing going forward? How are we leveraging these assets? Jim showed this slide, so I'll go through it quickly. Again, farmers are getting only 15 cents on the dollar that you spend on food. That's mostly what we're doing here today in this region. What we really want to capture is at least the food and ag cluster, so the aggregation, processing, and distribution. That then turns into 60 cents on the dollar, and then you have a multiplier effect that starts to get into the marketing, the retail, legal services, things like that. So we are aiming to capture more of this food dollar, and to do that built upon these regional food systems.
Hey, David, we need to start wrapping up soon, so if you could just, for maybe a couple more minutes, wrap up, that would be great.
Sure.
Sorry.
So we are looking at the economics of these food hubs. We now can estimate the economics on the field, but what happens as you start moving that food through the food system? So we had an engineer show us his plans for a typical food hub. We ran the numbers. We found that it could be profitable by year 5. We estimated how many acres it would need to support just one of these 25,000 square foot prototypical facilities. We then went out and said, okay, let's start to expand this to larger efforts, and how much land does it take to start getting into larger and larger portions of the food supply coming from local and regional sources. We then said, okay, so now we've got the system figured out and the economics. What does that mean in terms of impact? We estimated the multipliers for this industry. They look very competitive compared to other industry clusters out there. And in fact, that most of the jobs are actually urban. That agriculture and food is actually more of an urban industry than it is a rural industry at a rate of 2 to 1. So 2 employees in town for every 1 employee you have out on a field, and you can look at also the value there. That's just specialty crop production. We also then said, okay, now that we understand how the economics work on the landscape, let's look at the economics of land use itself and urbanization. And we went through and started looking at acreage conversions and said, how much value are you losing in just your food production? That's today's value. That's a potential future value. We said, here's the cost of infrastructure to build out that community that you have in mind. And then we also put that in terms of operation and maintenance of that community. And what we're finding, of course, is that denser development is actually potentially a money maker, definitely less expensive. And so we have a way now to have a regional conversation about being able to accommodate growth, but do it in a more compact fashion and still help protect this ag industry that we have here. It also affects air quality to the tune of anywhere from 58 to 70 times greenhouse gas emissions from urbanization versus productive ag land. So now we can talk about this in terms of air quality. We're doing studies about the air quality related to the food system. So again, what does this do for our region in terms of meeting our air quality targets and state targets? This all wraps up now in SACOG's planning for the future and working with its jurisdictions to figure out where are we going to put growth and how much land are we consuming to do that. This is a look in the rearview mirror and then looking forward. We used to reuse 333 acres for every 1,000 people. We're down to 42, and that number is dropping. So I'm gonna end on this, and I'll go quickly. But what are the opportunities at COGS? Again, funding, so we can help with coordination, providing information to our local jurisdictions and other players out there about funding opportunities. I just showed you all the data that we've put together, so we can develop that data and put it into portals where people can pull that down. Modeling, I just showed you all of that. Engagement, we've heard this a couple of times now. The regional forum that we offer is a really good place for people to come and talk about these things and to start building these strategies. And at the end of the day, it's really about implementation. Starts with strategies and coordination and getting people engaged in a vision for the future. What are the challenges here? Well, funding. The color of the money and the availability is oftentimes a challenge for us and for other COGS trying to start a program like RUCS. Data, availability, and cost. Again, we've kind of put a lot of time and effort into building that data, but it was expensive, and not every COG can do that. And same with modeling. They have to have the expertise, they have to have the tools available, and that a lot of that's really not out there at the level that we have it. Stakeholders, do they actually trust what we're telling them, and are they interested? Are they engaged? And then finally, implementation. So again, that funding hurdle is a big one for actually getting things in the ground. Are the private partners out there willing to work with us? And as was mentioned earlier, COGS don't have a lot of authority when it comes to land use or other regulations. And so, you know, we're doing studies and then hoping people will implement them. So with that, I've gone over, but that's what's going on here in the Sacramento region.
Thank you, David. And I'm sorry again for interrupting. It's amazing how fast an hour goes. I appreciate it. And thank you to all of our speakers too. For those who could still stay with us, we do have a couple of questions that we would like to share. So Cameron will be presenting those.
Yeah, so we have a few questions. If you have a question, just a reminder, you can answer or ask it in the questions drop down on your tool screen. Our first question is for James Matson. What examples of state policies have you come across that support food hubs?
There varies a lot around the country with that. There are some states that explicitly allow development in regions that, you know, may not happen in order to have that, you know, business take place. I'd say it's an area that the regulations are probably catching up to where folks are on the business side. However, I would say that there have been a lot of food brokers, et cetera, around. So as an industry itself, it's not brand new. So not a lot of specific things. A lot of it has been on the funding side and setting up and lessons learned and what establishing it. I think the regulations are still kind of falling behind about what needs to happen with that.
Thank you. Our next question, looks like it's for David and others. You spoke about the role of COGS and regional council, about the role COGS and regional councils can play in increasing awareness of regional food issues. I would imagine that a key determinant of the success of that strategy has to do with being able to identify and articulate those issues that are most motivating to regional council audiences, and perhaps to translate between the language of food systems stakeholders and regional council stakeholders. Could you speak to what issues specifically you feel are best elevated to regional council audiences and any best practices for speaking the same language? It's a long question.
Well, I think they began to kind of answer their own question there. Again, I think that the COGS are interesting position and that they've been around for a while. They're stable. They've got credibility with local governments. And yeah, they've been there and they know how to speak that language to elected leadership, but probably also, then maybe more importantly over time, because those folks come and go too, to local government professional staff. And they can translate that into hopefully meaningful projects and pursuit of grant funds and that sort of thing over time. I think some of the issues that I've seen where this has kind of come into play in our region anyway, maybe Gregory can elaborate if he wants to on this, but the whole set of issues around food access, healthy food access, the impact that that very basic idea has on outcomes like health, which translates into workforce availability and functionality, which translates into economic development. Just kind of drawing those connections for people, I think is very helpful. And you know, the same message, maybe even some of the same words can come perhaps from some of the local food stakeholders who are very passionate about the issues that they're working on. I think perhaps part of that role of the COG and the professional staff who work there is maybe to be a little bit more dispassionate about it all, and to kind of force the issue of what kind of data do we have to bring to the table that supports these claims that may come more from the advocates to kind of bolster their case for making those issues more apparent and grounded in the realities that the data might help them to show. So it could work on both ends. They could work with the advocates to help them shape those kind of policy frameworks and to bring the information that's relevant to bear. But then also they maintain open lines of communication. So if they're doing a good job, I would imagine, with local governments, so that on the receiving end, they know how to get that message to the right people.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for one more question. You mentioned looking into valuing slash monetizing ecosystem services. How are you thinking about how to operationalize that?
Well, I mean, right now we just have to put a value on it. So, you know, habitat values are coming out of like environmental impact reports, looking at the cost of mitigation for certain species. So, you know, that's a way to kind of start backing into what's the market value for habitat conservation. We're looking at what's the value of recharging our aquifers, and we look at water sales as a proxy for the value of doing that. So, you know, right now we're just trying to figure out how to actually put a credible value on that. And then once we do, in thinking about the model, as we look at the landscape and the changes in the use of those open lands, are we moving in a direction that, for example, helps with groundwater recharge, or becomes an impediment to groundwater recharge because, say, for example, that crop cannot tolerate being flooded, which is the main way that we would use cropland to get water down into the aquifer. So it's a way for us to actually then start to think about how do you incentivize habitat or groundwater recharge or whatever the ecosystem services that you're targeting by providing, say, an incentive through a payment to a farmer to do certain things in order to create that habitat or limit himself to crops that are conducive to groundwater recharge. So that's the idea that we have. The methodology of getting there is what we're working on right now.
All right, thank you. Well, for those who are still with us, if you do have any more questions, or if you're interested in getting more involved in our regional food system research activities, with whether it be NARC or those that are speaking on the webinar, please use the contact information on your screen to reach out to me or to any of the others. They'd be glad to hear from you. We are planning more webinars that will focus on local food and regional food systems. So please stay tuned for announcements for future webinars that will be released at a later date. If you're interested in being notified of that, whenever we have another webinar, let me know. And please feel free to send us any ideas that you may have about future topics if there's particular things you want to hear more about, like funding or ways that you can start up your own local planning initiatives around food. Let us know. We would love to hear about it. And as a reminder, you'll receive an email within the next 24 hours with a link to the video of the presentation and the slides. Thank you all again for your attendance. Thank you to our great presenters. And like I said before, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and have a great rest of the day.